Hello, folks, and welcome back to Chris Wyatt Africa here on the Indaba Africa channel, part of the Indaba Broadcasting Network. It is Silvesterabend, New Year's Eve, named after a saint by the Germans, Silvesterabend, the final day of the year, 2021, a year many of us hope to forget. Well, folks, just moments away, I'll be doing a special feature for members perks once again. If you're not a member, you can watch this stream. You just won't be able to comment, at least until later in the stream, when I ask my viewers who are paying members who support independent journalism if they're okay with that. We'll probably open at some point. But I realized that after I got started here, I need to actually add another screen here, which I missed. Let me get this up really quickly here. This is, excuse me. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to share, and you can ask questions as we go along here if you're a paying member. I'm going to share some of my experiences in rebuilding the Armed Forces of Liberia. Hang on with a second there. There you go. All right, for some reason, that's not quite fitting the screen. Let's get it set up. Fit the screen. There we go. That's much better. Anyway, folks, we're going to get started in that in just a moment. But before we do, let's take a look at the current progress of the James Webb Space Telescope, where it finds itself out there in space. Whoop, that ain't right. That's the wrong one. Hang on. That's what happens when you change screens. Just a second here. There we go. All right, now let's see if we got it working here. There we go. James Webb Space Telescope, current location in space, over 700,000 kilometers from the planet. Traveling out to Lagrange 2 point, it's now approaching the halfway point, 48% after just 6 days. Look at that, folks. Speed is continuing to decrease. You can see now it's gone from over 1.4 kilometers per second to a kilometer to 9.9 to 854 meters last night. Now it's down to 728 meters per second, 3/4 of a kilometer per second, and it will take slower speed as it reaches its destination. Well, thank you for joining me today, folks. As I traveled back last night, this is day 6, 2 hours, 15 minutes, because, of course, it was around 7:20 in the morning when this thing launched on Christmas Day. But as I traveled back last night from my trip to New Jersey to see my stepfather, who's ailing in a care facility, it reminded me of the frailty of life. It reminded me very much of the frailty of life and how precious life is and how fleeting it is. And it's unfortunate, the holidays, when we lose many people. And unfortunately, that happens for accidents and other means, suicides and such. But sad, tragic news to share with you folks from last night on my way home as I pulled over to look at messages that had piled up on my phone. Very frustrating, driving in very poor weather. I took my time last night, cognizant of the fact that the weather was poor and that my life was in my hands traveling on the road. So last night, traveled actually a little bit under the speed limit for most of my trip back. Excuse me, folks. For most of my trip back. But I did stop for a rest break a couple of times, which was prudent given the weather conditions, and it was a dark hour in Pennsylvania on highways. But last night, I checked my messages, and at about 10:30 last night, I received a message from one of our loyal viewers, dedicated viewers, Ronel Kantz. She told me that her daughter, Letitia, who was 27 years old, died in a traffic accident last night. Our thoughts and prayers and condolences to Ronel and her entire family at this most difficult of times. I hope that in the time she had a wonderful life, and that she got the most of it, made the most of it, particularly given how our lives have been stolen from us by fascists over the past 2 years. May she rest in peace, and peace to you and your family. Ronel, we grieve with you with your loss of your daughter. 27 years old, Letitia, passed away after a tragic traffic accident last night in South Africa. Well, folks, let's take a look once again at the James Webb Space Telescope. What's happening there? It's on its way to Lagrange 2 point. That will be 1.5 million kilometers from Earth, and it's nearly halfway there after 6 days since its launch on Christmas Day. Lots of distance to cover yet, but it is quite a ways on that journey. And so with that, folks, let's get to the purpose of today's live stream. This is a live stream to talk about my experiences having served in Liberia. For those who don't know, I served in Liberia from 2007 until 2008 in the U.S. Army at the American Embassy. I was a major when I arrived. I didn't know it, but I was a promotable major. I should have figured that part out. Seems highly unlikely the Army would send someone who's not going to be promoted to one of their most high-profile positions on the continent of Africa, which was to be responsible for the security sector reform for the Armed Forces of Liberia, which ironically was supposed to have been completed prior to my arrival, but owing to underfunding and a lack of strategic initiative and desire on the part of the executive branch of the U.S. government, not the embassy, but the executive branch itself, this mission was not complete. And so when I arrived, there was a force of 102 soldiers, and it was supposed to already be a 2,000 soldier light infantry brigade completely finished, but that was far from the case. I spent the better part of a year plus leading, designing, and executing a program in security sector reform for national defense, dealing with the United Nations mission in Liberia, UNMIL, dealing with the UN Special Representative in Liberia, dealing with the President of Liberia, the Congress, the House, the Senate of Liberia, the Armed Services Committee, the Senate Armed Services Committee, the U.S. Department of State, the U.S. European Command, the U.S. Africa Command, the United Nations, the military contingents on the ground. The list is endless. Press, the Wall Street Journal, France Press, Voice of America, endless interest from people. And it was a 7-day-a-week, 24 hours a day job. It was one of the most taxing and fulfilling experiences of my entire life. We made an incredible contribution. I had at any given time 350 to 750 people working for me or on behalf of me, executing a plan that I had to design on short notice because all the other plans were unworkable since the money hadn't been there. I did take the basis of a plan that was there and turn that into a plan that executed. So I'm going to share some of my experiences, mostly through photographs with you this morning about my experiences. For members who are here in the chat, feel free to comment if you like or ask any questions that you like. If the audience increases and we get more folks who aren't paying for supporting the channel, then I'll ask the members if they mind if I open up. But right now, just a small audience, just 24 people, so we'll get started. So once again, folks, a belated Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, or as we say in German, Guten Rutsch, which literally means a good slide into the new year. Let's hope you have a good slide into 2022, and we can forget 2021. Check out my video on Bekele, who got egg on his face, threatening to arrest South Africans over non-existent curfew. Just shows you how little people like Bekele and the African National Congress care for the rule of law. They care for their ability to threaten and intimidate you, which is what he did. He threatened and intimidate people, locking them up in prison over the weekend, keeping them incarcerated. That's Bekele's justice, not real justice. Meanwhile, the government of South Africa lifted the curfew. Nobody told Becky. He was completely out of the loop. But let's get to this exposition of photographs from my experiences in Liberia, ladies and gentlemen. Let's cover that. All right, so, yeah, let's just do that now. Well, I'll pop on the camera occasionally. Oops, that's the wrong one. What's going on there? That's not the one I want. Wrong screen. Here's the screen I want right there. There you go, folks. So that's a photograph of me outside my office, which faced the Atlantic Ocean. The white in the background is actually the Atlantic Ocean. You can't see it very well. With my staff in the embassy, my immediate staff in there. Yep. Yep. So Commander Esley is a Navy submariner there. Monosenko. Yep. My NCO. That was my team at the embassy. And I wore many different uniforms and outfits in my time there. You can see that day I was wearing what I call the Class B. That's the short sleeve shirt, no tie, with my ribbons and my rank and my signet. This is when I was still assigned to the European Command, EUCOM, before African Command existed. This photograph is from the fall of 2007. And let's go from there. So this is just a snapshot of how we used to keep track of what was going on in the country. Used to have to give a daily snapshot. This chart really didn't accomplish much, but it was done by my predecessors to keep the European Command informed. And it just shows what was going on with foreign military financing, foreign military sales, excess defense articles, international military education and training, mill-to-mill, humanitarian assistance, defense, HIV awareness prevention program, the President's Emergency Program for AIDS relief, acquisition cross-servicing agreement, security sector reform, and the Office of Defense Cooperation, specific to the office. This is what we were called at the time, the Office of Defense Cooperation. So you can see here that we have to give them a stoplight chart, red, yellow, and green for what's going on. So for instance, the two things here really had to change on this chart was that the International Military Education Training Program, we had students in the States, and we have 4 NCOs that were going to go to Germany in October, and their visa issue had been resolved on 30 August. So this was the end of the month. I had to turn this in on the 31st of August, and so I had resolved this. Now, what's interesting about this, ladies and gentlemen, is that I had come up with a unique solution. We had a problem. Sending Liberians to the States was very expensive because they had to fly to Europe first, then on to the States, and had a lot of challenges. We had a non-commissioned officer training school in Vilsack in Germany, which we're allowed to use. Now, these are Liberians. They're not Americans. Americans are covered under Status Force Agreement, so how do we do this? Well, we asked the Germans if they can issue a Schengen visa. My predecessor had not put this in motion and was going to send it to the States. Well, the cost to send the States was manifestly higher. Manifestly higher. So we were trying to get as many of these new soldiers trained as possible because they're the core of the new force, and we wanted them trained. Well, my solution was to send them to Germany, which wasn't my idea, someone else, but they couldn't figure it out. So we had a function, and the German ambassador showed up. Now, there's no German consulate at the time in Monrovia, just an embassy, no consulate. So there's no consular services. So if you want a visa, you have to go to their closest consul office, which is in Ghana. Well, you can't get to Ghana unless you fly or you go overland for a week. These soldiers couldn't just disappear for a week. So what I did is I spoke to the German, and it turns out he was an ethnic German from the Baltics. And I'm a historian, and German history is something that's very near and dear to my research. So we started talking about his experiences growing up in the Baltic, and then I asked him if he could help me out, and he said, well, how can I help you? So I have a small problem here. We have soldiers we'd like to send to Germany, but they're Liberians, and of course the German government in Berlin would consider them potentially an economic migrant and not a legitimate person there. But I can guarantee you that we pay for their flight there and back. We pick them up at the airport, U.S. military, and we take them back to the airport. They remain under our control in training throughout their 1 month in Germany. And we can assure that they'll return. All cost of their lodging, their billeting, their food, everything is taken care of by us. And so there's no burden on the German government and virtually no risk that they'll disappear and become economic migrants in Germany. He said, no, that's great. If you can just give me a letter that confirms that, I will talk to our consular section in Ghana, and I'll set something up so that if you can get the Ministry of Defense to send their passports and the application there, we'll waive, and there's a small fee, they'll pay the fee, we'll waive them appearing in person, which is what they did. And the system worked brilliantly for over a year. I departed, my predecessor assumed control of the program. I briefed my predecessor, plus had a written program down. And then for some reason that fell apart, and they started spending 3 times as much money, which means 1/3 the number of NCOs, the non-commissioned officers, that could go back to the States, as opposed to what to go to Germany. It's unfortunate, but it just shows the power of personal diplomacy. And the German ambassador was very helpful. So I just resolved this the day prior. So there you go. Now, the other piece of this, folks, is the security sector reform. We had a $35 million supplemental appropriation approved by Congress, and we had started using it. The initial entry training class 0709, which is the month and the class number, was set to graduate on September 7th, just a few days away, and we had adjusted the structure of the force. This is as of the 31st of August, 2007. So that's just, they call it the stoplight chart because that's what it was, a stoplight. So there you go. This is what the Armed Forces Liberia was supposed to look like in the end, folks. Armed Forces Liberia was supposed to have 146 officers, 1,854 enlisted troops, and it'd be a light infantry brigade. In other words, no armored vehicles, just on foot, with a headquarters and headquarters company, and the numbers below each of the unit symbols is the strength. 113 assigned to the headquarters company for the brigade, 2 infantry battalions of 680 soldiers, an engineer company, 220, military police company of 105, a BTU, which is not British thermal unit, but the brigade training unit. That was later changed to the AFL training command, but that's what we called it, the BTU at the time, and the band, which originally was not envisioned. It's fascinating because the band was not envisioned when the plan was made by the U.S. Department of State and the interim government of Liberia under Judy Bryant to create a new military from the former Armed Forces Liberia. They didn't have a plan for a band. At some point, somebody said, hey, what about the band? Okay, what about the band? That wasn't part of the plan. We never budgeted for that. Well, we need a band. We have to have a band so soldiers can march, esprit de corps for parades and ceremonies, and good point. So the Department of State hired a former U.S. Army band member, very talented gentleman named Bruce, who did an amazing job recruiting the former band members almost exclusively, a couple new ones, training them, disciplined and drill, marched and all that, and got uniforms for them, purchased the uniforms, beautiful, brilliant red uniforms. You'll see those coming up shortly. And then got the band organized. But they weren't part of the formal program. So when I arrived, the band was always in need of transportation, always in need of meals because they're traveling. You have to provide their lunches or dinners if they're doing an event. And the Ministry of Defense had no money for that and turned to me and said, hey, well, I couldn't do anything legally. They didn't work for me. They weren't part of the U.S. government. They weren't in the contract. So it was outside the scope of that. The good news is that frequently we had events. Troops also had to go. We had to provide transportation for troops. So eventually the band had a bus as well, and they were able to travel on their own. But as far as meals, we'd always have a bit extra food, and we could provide that to the band. It was a challenge. But the Armed Forces Liberia band was a big deal in Liberia, to say the very least, folks. Yeah, so anyway, this is the structure of the force. At the bottom there, you can see on the bottom left-hand side that when I arrived in May of 2007, there were 102 soldiers in this new army. When I left in September of 2008, the figure was 2,137. The mission was 2,000. Of that 2,000, we had 127 officers and 2,010 enlisted. Now, that's less officers than are required for the force, but bear in mind that that force would include lieutenant colonels, majors, captains, people who had experience in years of service and was the ultimate vision. We had only brand new second lieutenants at this point. None had been promoted to first lieutenant even. So we had provided 127 lieutenants for that force. I was required to give them 60. So they got more than double what they were supposed to get. So this is just a kind of a calendar to show you the sort of things that we did and how complicated it was. The 6-month calendar going from July through through November. So you can see all sorts of events here. This would have been 2008, not 2007, just a random training calendar that we had. And so you see that we had a staff training meeting, staff training. We're training staff on how to be staff officers and NCOs. That was May through July. These are the courses at the top. The Chinese provided signals and intelligence and a wireless training course, fuel support, barracks maintainers, NCO courses. These are all courses that the Ministry of Defense organized with the Chinese and didn't tell us about until they already committed to it. And so it disrupted our training schedule. We had to restart. So that's what those courses were. We had engineer course from June to July for 5 weeks. Then we had in red there, because it wasn't confirmed yet, we didn't have the resources, a signals course, a unit supply course, generator mechanic course, personnel, military police, light wheel vehicle mechanic. All these are courses. Nigerian Jungle School, another thing that they agreed to. They sent 200 soldiers from March to September and notified us of this in like February that they had to send these soldiers. We had to disrupt the plans for activating units. Who was going to go to the course? It was a total disaster. The lack of cooperation from the Ministry of Defense in telling us about offers that they were getting and making unilateral decisions was very challenging for us to overcome and still build a force. You can't simply say, here's 200 soldiers. They got to come from places, and it affects plans. Well, at this point on the calendar, the personnel strength was 1,606 plus the band, which was supposed to be 40, but it declined to 39 members. And we had mentors assigned who were contractors, former drill sergeants, and military instructors from the Marines and the Army. And we had 41 mentors authorized. We had 13 assigned. We were really short on cash at this point. So 12 were trainers. 12 trainers were assigned, and 9 were assigned, 12 were authorized. So we could have had 53 personnel. At this time, we're working with 22. And we're pulling off all these events with just 22. Now, things at the bottom for training for the actual units, not courses, but we see battle drills, graduation, situational training exercise, military police company being formed, and the combat engineer companies being formed, as well as Army readiness and evaluation training program events. So this is the construction plan that was out there. This is the map that was prepared by Pacific Architects and Engineers and was used throughout the reconstruction of the locations out there at Edward Binyat Kesley Military Barracks, the former Camp Schieffelin. Different phases based on resources. They did a prototype in phase 1. It was proof of concept, that's the red one, to rehabilitate one of the barracks. And once they'd done that and they were satisfied, they did phase 2, the key ones including the headquarters, the dining facility, the bandstand, and lodging for troops, as well as security towers so that things wouldn't be stolen around the installation. Phase 3 included additional housing units. Phase 4, additional housing units, a maintenance facility, and some other things taking place. And the others, Phase 4 include those blue places off to the right-hand side, which were located on part of the base that was still under control of the United Nations. And Phase 5 was ultimately communications place, the executive officer's house, and the ablution unit, or water treatment plant, excuse me. So this is an example of what we're doing with there. This is the Inquirer, a Liberian newspaper that came out on the 10th of July, 2008. $20 Liberian, by the way, which is like 40 cents U.S., 40 cents. And no confidence in the police yet, as President Johnson Sirleaf had to say. She said the vetting process of police was not as vigorous, and it did not produce the desired results as it was the case with the new army. Well, the case with the new army is that we ran it, and that's why it was vigorous. The American government ran the process through its contractors. So this is an example of many of the things we had to coordinate when I was there. So being in Liberia wasn't as simple, ladies and gentlemen, as you just do what you need to do. You got a lot of coordination. First off, it's a country that just went through a 13-year civil war, and as a consequence, it had a lot of issues. So there was a weapons ban by the United Nations. You couldn't import weapons or ship weapons, prohibition against that for Liberia. But we need weapons to train soldiers. You can't train soldiers with sticks. They're not very effective. So they have to use firearms. Well, how do we do that? Where do we get the ammunition? What happens? Well, we had to import it. We had to get the United Nations approval. The United Nations came periodically and inspected our security in the arms room, and they thought it was world class. Very well done by the contractors that worked for me. And then we also had to get approval from ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, to import ammunition and pyrotechnics for training. And that's what this is. So here you can see that the Commission of the ECOWAS Community of West African States presents its compliments to the Ministry of National Defense in the Republic of Liberia, has the honor to acknowledge receipt of its note verbal, the 18th of April, concerning the request for a waiver for the ECOWAS moratorium on importation, exportation, manufacture of small arms to enable the country to purchase arms and ammunition to equip its national armed forces. The quantities and specifications of the arms and ammunition are listed as follows. AK-47 rifle, approved in 2006, 1,107. We asked for an additional 500. Pistols, we had none approved. We asked for 250. RPKs, 892. RPG-7s, 100 we lowered it, or excuse me, added another 50. Ammunition, we had 1 million rounds approved. We asked another 400,000 for training, and the list goes on there. Your request has been forwarded to all member states. Application would be approved. Necessary authorization to import would be granted if by May 25th, no objections. And no objections were raised, so we were able to import these things and bring them into Liberia, which were necessary for training. But you can see, this is a state-to-state coordination. I had to deal with the regional economic body. This memo is from the Ministry of Defense, but we prepared this memorandum. We requested, we forecast. The Ministry of Defense was just the Liberian government forwarding it. They weren't actually doing anything. So now I'm going to take you through a series of photographs, folks, and hope you find those interesting, of my time there. These are all my photographs. Unless I'm in it, then someone took it with my camera. But otherwise, they're all photographs that I took. Frequently, I had my NCO with me, and he became my informal photographer, among other things, making sure he captured the events as went along using my camera. This was before smartphones and before you had high-quality cameras or high-quality cameras on those phones. So this was all taken with digital cameras. So here are some pictures just to give you a feel for what Liberia was like, and we'll go through some events. It's not sequenced entirely in chronological order, but mostly. So let's take a look at this, my personal experiences in Liberia. So what's going on here? There we go. All right, so there you go, folks. So this is 0 week, day one. This is the day that recruits enter the Army. You can see these are photographs from what was the Voice of America retransmission site, which we turned into Camp Sandy S. Ware. It became a military training facility. It used to be where the Voice of America was housed at. We used the existing structures out there and built barracks and other things. It was quite amazing. It's just like a basic training experience that those of us went through the Marines and the Army would have experienced in America. The Liberians wanted American standards for their military, and so we trained to those standards. So if you look here on the left-hand side top, you see a contractor wearing fatigues, former drill sergeant, and young recruits rushing out of the vans that they're delivered in, on foot, charging. In the front is a young lady who dropped her paperwork, and the guy behind her is trying to avoid running into her. On the right-hand side, they look, the men are clean-shaven. Their heads were cleanly shaven before they got out there. They are looking kind of unsure what they've signed up for here, but now they find themselves on day zero. Outside, not following directions leads to push-ups. If you've served in the military, you know what this is like. So here they are getting their first taste of physical strain for not following instructions. You see there 5 different drill sergeants, including the senior drill sergeant who has his back to you. He was outstanding, did a great job there. And on the right-hand side, you see inside with the clothing issue where clothing is being issued. You can see these recruits who outside were wearing civilian clothes. Inside now are wearing their physical fitness suits. That's a gray T-shirt with black shorts and running shoes, which were all issued to them free of charge. This is the main hall in there inside one of the buildings, and they're going through their clothing issue. So that was July of 2007. This was after the initial proof of concept basic training course with 105 candidates, 102 graduated, and that's who I inherited when I came there. This is the first class of 525 recruits in July of 2007. So the Armed Forces of Liberia wanted to recruit additional soldiers. The Ministry of Defense wanted to be involved. It was their military after all, and that's fair enough. So they organized a recruiting drive downtown in Monrovia. This was on the 22nd of August, 2007 at the Sports Commission. You can see the Armed Forces of Liberia band on the left-hand side there. Their spiffy red uniforms. Their band leader's name was Billy, and he was the youngest member of the band. And the older members, all of whom had carried the rank of colonel or something like that in the old military, took great exception, many of them, to the fact that a young man was in charge of them. But he was a very good band leader, and he dealt with all the leadership challenges, despite the fact that this band was largely orphaned by the Ministry of Defense. I did all I could outside the scope of the contract to help them. But you can see massive crowds showed up here in Monrovia for this recruiting drive. This is very, very heartwarming for librarians, very important event for them. 22nd of August, 2007. Now, I went out to take a look at the Coast Guard base. What I'm showing you here are images of the Coast Guard base plus the free port of Monrovia. On the left-hand side is the famous image of the Torm Alexander. The Torm Alexander was a cargo ship that was sunk by mortar rounds, if I'm not mistaken, at the pier in Monrovia. Of the 4 piers in the free port, only one was operational. Another one had the Mercy ship, which if you look over the top of that ship in the distance, you can see the exhaust pipes for the ship, the Mercy ship, which provided medical aid to Liberians. And so it occupied one berth, and that berth was gone permanently because that ship never left. This one blocked another berth. Then the next berth, you can see on the photo to the right, if you look in the distance, you'll see the Torm Alexander behind there. And here, what you see is a massive hole in the pier where a mortar round or a couple of artillery round took out the pier and people couldn't use it. So from this portion down, it was unusable. The only portion of the pier that was usable was the very narrow space between the Torm Alexander and where those gentlemen are standing. On the bottom down there, that building actually became the headquarters building for the new Coast Guard, but it was occupied by squatters. And in that photograph, you can see a British lieutenant colonel who was working for me on the program walking around outside there. People just moved in and lived there. It was a government building. They occupied. They had to be evicted. And on the right-hand side, it's difficult to see, but that's the shoreline with dozens of beached ships that are rusting away on the coast of Monrovia who couldn't get to shore or do anything during the conflict. So this is what I was dealing with. Now, this is the Voice of America, what became Camp Sandy S. Ware training base out in Carysburg, about an hour drive from Monrovia. Not because it's an hour's distance, but because of the quality of the roads and the way you have to get there through people. Well, this was their final PT test before graduation, and I showed up. If you look very closely in the image on the top right-hand side, you'll see someone with very pale legs walking out there in PT uniform, the same uniform the recruits are wearing. For those in the Armed Forces today who remain in the Liberian Armed Forces who were present on that day in this second class of recruits going into the Armed Forces, they will never forget this day, nor will I. I went there to show solidarity with these young recruits because there were no Armed Forces of Liberia soldiers to train them. We had 102. They were learning, developing as leaders back in Monrovia at the Barclay Training Center and Edward Biniak Kesley Barracks, becoming an army and being mentored by our experienced military. So there were no Liberians training them. There was no Liberian for them to look up to for inspiration, for leadership. I took on that role. in the first 60 days of this course, which is 2 months long, I made over 30 journeys out there, which meant a 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning get up and drive out there early morning hours with my driver to Carysburg to be present for training and show leadership or events that took place. That was a hell of a commitment. One, I was not able to sustain because it simply is impossible, but this was so important to the program, in my view, that I did that, which just meant I worked 7 days a week, working till late at night, 12, 16 hours a day. But the mission comes first. And the mission came first. So I became particularly incensed this day when I went out there, and in traditional fashion that's very common for many folks in Africa, unfortunately, rather than do what they've been told to do, a lot of people like to cheat. And that's what happened this day. So I went out there. Now, let me ask you this question. If everybody is black that's running, except one much older fellow in his 40s, who's white as a ghost, is running, would you turn around and cheat right in front of the pale as a ghost guy? Now, I intentionally ran towards the back, not because I couldn't. I could have finished in the top finishers. I was in that good a condition. But I ran towards the back to exhort, to encourage those who are lagging, having difficulty successfully passing PTS. Because you don't pass it, you don't get to go on. You get kicked out. So I didn't want anybody to be lost because of the physical fitness training. So I was there, and I stayed back. And as we went about a mile, not even a mile, about a half mile into the race, Liberian soldiers started turning around and running back. First off, they're going to run back. They're going to come in like 10 minutes too early. No one runs that fast. That's going to be suspicious. So not very bright. But I was angry. And so as a consequence, what happened over my anger on this is that when we got back after I completed the race, I told the contractors, the trainers, to get the formation lined up. And here you see them lined up. And I'm walking back and forth, up and down the formation, and I am yelling and I am excoriating those who cheated. I gave them an opportunity to report themselves, because if we found out later on that they cheated and they didn't report themselves, they would be kicked out of the military. I had that kind of authority to do that. Now, what's interesting is that a number of people who did cheat went and turned themselves in. Now, they weren't punished for it, but they were counseled and told about how their actions detracted from military readiness and that we can't have dishonest people. They were given a free pass. But these young recruits had the fear of God put into them that day. Now, what you can see there is that I was running. I had my camera with me during the run. So I was running, carrying a camera, taking those pictures. So I took those pictures. Yep. Anyway, that was an interesting day, to say the least. To say the very least. This was September of 2007. This was just before they graduated. So this is a field training exercise on October 2nd for the next class that was in there. And I was in there. That's me actually in the bottom right-hand corner there. I didn't take that picture, obviously, standing there with my Army camouflage or combat uniform on, ACUs. These are Liberian troops doing different things, going through maneuver spaces, firing from positions. You can see that some of the soldiers have their tops turned inside out. These were the opposing forces, so they could be clearly identified as if they're wearing a different uniform. And then you can see the smoke grenade there on the top left-hand side. This was actually a pretty good location to do this sort of training. You can see that soldiers are wearing the battle dress uniform from the American Army. That's what the Liberians wanted. But their weapons are AK-47s, which is what we insisted upon, rather than American weapons, which are expensive and difficult to maintain. And you can't get parts for them in Africa, but you can get AK-47s. This is a graduation on the 5th of October for the class you just saw. This is the second class of 525. Two photographs here. You can see the troops in formation on the right-hand side with the color guard. We graduated about 485, I think, in this class out of 525, washed out 40 of the 525. On the left-hand side, you see me slender, tall. Chris Wyatt walking there in my dress uniform. Bear in mind, folks, that it's like 36 degrees Celsius. Humidity is about 90%. And here we are. To my right, where he belongs, is Major General Suraj Abdul Rahman, a wonderful human being if there ever was one. Tragically passed away several years ago in New York City from an ailment prematurely. He was brilliant, wonderful. If he had not passed away, I would not doubt that he would have risen to the highest levels in the Nigerian military. He was already a two-star general at this point, very talented. And you see the stage up there. And I gave a speech. I actually have, is it that one? No, I have a different speech here, which I'll read if people are interested later on. Our training program involved lots of people. So the International Committee of the Red Cross was part of this, folks. So here you see ICRC Training on the 29th of October, 2007. The International Committee of the Red Cross was present in Liberia. And we brought them in to teach our non-commissioned officers and our officers about the rule of law, Geneva Conventions, and international humanitarian law, and how you deal with these things. Also doing the minimized amount of damage, minimizing the harm that militaries do. So here you can see Liberian soldiers with their tops off because it's incredibly warm in this building. And we use generators to provide electricity. And so there you are getting training. A gentleman on the left-hand photo and along with the lady were from Geneva who were down there. So we worked in coordination. This cost us nothing, but it paid off immensely. This was not part of the program. It's something I incorporated into the program to ensure that we were getting the sort of training for our new military to respect civil authority and protect humans or protect civilians. So these were company activations. This was the first activation of new units, formal units in the Armed Forces of Liberia. Two photographs here on the left-hand side. You can see General Abdul Rahman receiving the Guyde as it's activated for Bravo Company of the 1st Battalion. Look at the soldiers dressed very smartly. This is the Barclay Training Center. In the background is a water tower come security tower, and you can see 2 Liberian soldiers up there watching. Behind that tower is the Atlantic Ocean. It's right on the beach. That's also the spot where, after the government was overthrown in 1980, they murdered the members of Tubman's cabinet. They put telephone poles out there, tied them to it, and executed them on the beach right there. Ended their lives. Horrific. Horrific. So here is General Abdul Rahman taking the Guyde on. On the right-hand side, you see me dressed in my dress uniform, my formal uniform, with the European Command's patch on because this was still under European Command. That is the Barclay Training Center. You can see more of the installation there. And soldiers, after the event was over, milling around, congratulating each other, thanking each other. I'm being interviewed by the media. There's at least 3 members of the media right there, 4 actually, and I'm answering questions about the process and what's actually happened here. Spent a lot of time dealing with the media throughout my time in Liberia to make sure that people knew what was going on with this military. This is the Africa Partnership Station. This was a Navy event coordinated by Navy Forces Europe, and it traveled across the littoral region of West Africa, picking up ship riders from different countries like Ghana, Benin, Nigeria, Cameroon, who became crew members on the ships and traveled as part of this operation. Now, you see a landing ship here that we're on as we head out to the USS McHenry, which is there on the right-hand side, HSV-2, and then you see us heading out the water there. So this was an interesting experience working with the Navy. They also provided us Marines. The Marines did hand-to-hand combat training, survival skills, leadership training, and the Seabees, the construction battalion from the Navy, arrived with this mission and stayed with us for nearly 4 months, building schools and clinics under our direction at my Office of Defense Cooperation, which later became the Office of Security Cooperation. Yep. Is this of interest to anybody? I see people chatting, but no one's talking about what I'm talking about, so I don't know if it's of interest or if I'm just wasting your time. So this was in March of 2008. This is a high water mark in our training program. So many things going on simultaneously as this unfolded. This is when Akon, that's right, Akon, the musician, came to Liberia. And on the top right-hand side, in the bottom, you have Armed Forces Day. Armed Forces Day is the 11th of February. And this is Armed Forces Day for the Armed Forces of Liberia. It was a huge day. President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf marching in front of the troops, doing the passing review. She's inspecting the troops along with the police commissioner, well, not police commissioner, but the police officer from Monrovia, and General Abdul Rahman. Now, below that is a picture of the troops passing a review in front of the reviewing stand. That's the same place where George Bush spoke when he arrived in the country just days after this. So we were quite busy. On the 15th of April, that's a picture of Akon and his entourage talking to me. And you can see me stand there next to Liberian soldiers. It was quite a day. Quite a day, folks. This is when we transferred troops from the basic training location, Camp Sandy Esware, which I've been showing you earlier, and we took them out to the base. This was a pretty involved event. You transport close to 500 soldiers across non-existent roads to get to the base. They have to arrive. They've never been there. They're going to be assigned to barracks. Someone's in charge. It was quite an event each time we did this. Now, this is a photograph of me shaking the hand of the Minister of Defense, Brownie Samukai, and behind him, without his cap on, is General Abdul Rahman. You see in the blue there is the Deputy Minister of Defense for Administration work done. He passed away a few years back, rather unexpectedly and early in life. But yeah, this is when the troops were transferred out there. Yep. And then on the top right-hand side is you see the troops arriving at the main administration building on the base there. Actually, we've got an Air Force mentor who trained the medics up there on the right-hand side, the white fellow with the sleeves rolled up. And then one of the trainers is up on the top. And then these are troops arriving. In the distance in the right-hand corner, you can see the trucks, the DAC trucks, the Dutch trucks that we use to transport troops over there. These were borrowed from ECOWAS. They loaned them to us from their facility in Sierra Leone, which we were paying for, maintaining it. So they loaned it to us. Anyway, these troops arrive. They've got their paperwork in their hands, get assigned to the units, get assigned to their barracks and their bunk, and then they go out and report there and collect their linen and such. At the bottom, that's Sergeant Salby, who was a very loquacious and engaging young soldier who was one of the first non-commissioned officers in the new Army. And Sergeant Salby, I took her on the radio. And this is Coffee Break with United Nations morning drive time program. That's 26th of October, 2007. I went on the radio frequently and often took Liberian soldiers, male and female, to promote the military to folks in Liberia. So they were engaging with the military, knew what this military was up. Well, the last thing we wanted was to make it seem like it was some secret what was going on. So I was transparent on every occasion, at every opportunity, with the press, with other embassies, with the ECOWAS community, with the United Nations, with everyone involved, so that no one would consider we were doing anything inappropriate. And there you go. So let's get back to that. Nick says, I'm watching. The more I see and hear, it seems you will do a much better job running South Africa. Well, thank you for that. I think I would. But yes, this is a troop transfer. So very complicated. I mean, think about this. I had to think all these things through. No one was doing these interviews with the radio before I got there. And Liberians and others were concerned about what was going on. They didn't know. So they assumed, and they assumed incorrectly. This was some very important events here. Just a moment. Let me take a sip here. The first of which I'll talk about is the Senate confirmation hearing. Very weird situation. I found myself, see, in our military, unless you're a general officer taking over a command or something like that, you don't appear before the Senate Armed Services Committee for your confirmation. That's for the commander of Indo-Pacific Command, for Northern Command, for Africa Command, for European Command. They go and they testify. And a few other picks like the Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. But that's about it. Other military officers, your name is sent by your service up to the Secretary of Defense, who forwards it on, almost without exception, to the President. The President signs it, sends it to the Senate, and the Senate votes on it. And that's as simple as that. That's how it normally works, unless politics gets involved. But in Liberia, the Liberians wanted to behave and act as if they were the American government. Well, we're the Senate. We're going to have a confirmation hearing for these officer candidates to confirm their commission on them. Fair enough. You're a sovereign state. It's your right. But it was a bit odd for me as a then lieutenant colonel to go to a confirmation hearing and stand there and speak on behalf of Liberians who are in the Liberian Armed Forces, which were under my control, to have them confirmed by the Senate, especially when one of the people sitting at the table is Prince Johnson, the man who had the testicles sliced off of Samuel Doe and had him executed and tortured before he was murdered, his testicles stuffed in his mouth. Yeah, that Prince Johnson is part of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Yeah, so he's in this photograph. But this is the Senate confirmation hearing on the 18th of June, 2008. It was fascinating. And so you can see Prince Johnson there with the green outfit on and the cap on. So I was part of this and testified. Now, the other photographs are a red letter day, one of the most important days. We had activated companies in late 2007. You have to do this. The reason you have to do this is because as troops arrive, they're put into what's called a holding company, an administrative company. So that company's a place where every morning they show up, they go into formation, they report who's present, who's AWOL, who's missing, that sort of thing. And then they're sent off for their assigned training or task. Well, you have to develop esprit de corps, cohesion, unit integrity. You have to build a unit that can actually execute military missions. In order to do that, you develop leaders and you develop routines and standard operating procedures, and you work together habitually. That's how you build esprit de corps, cohesion, and you get teamwork. Well, if you're in a unit that has no identity, it's the holding company, that isn't going to work. It works well at a training base. You can put people there for a couple of days, but eventually you have to give them something functional. So we activated the first companies in late 2007, and now this is in July 2008. These are 6 infantry companies. Those were initial companies. These are 6 infantry companies that are focused on infantry tactics and being units and building it. So this was a key day, and that was on the 21st of July 2008. We couldn't do this until we had sufficient troops who were in the specialties and skill qualifications to be infantry. And so it took until this time to do it, and that's why we did it that day. You can see at the bottom there is a ruck march. I showed up frequently. This is at what used to be Camp Schieffelin. It's Edward Benyock Kesley, EBK Barracks, the main operational base of the new forces. The old base we took and turned it into. So you can see them in PT outfit along with their combat boots for a ruck march. I shocked the trainers because I showed up early in the morning when I first arrived. My predecessor hadn't been doing that. And like, I was a major. What's the major doing here? What's the major doing here? And I overheard them. I said, I'm here to participate and observe in the training. The government's paying you to execute this training, and I'm here. It's my fiduciary responsibility to oversee what's going on. Ooh, the dirty looks I got from contractors who've been allowed to do what they wanted to do with no oversight in the past. Well, that leads to problems. You need oversight. So I was there to ensure the contractors were executing the task at hand, and also to show leadership. There were no military. I was the only active military person other than these Liberian soldiers, all of whom were privates or second lieutenants and a few sergeants. 34 NCOs, 9 officers, and the rest were enlisted out of this 102. And I built great rapport and great loyalty from this first cohort of the Armed Forces of Liberia. Today, the Minister of Defense, one of those troops, the commander of the force, one of those troops, the Chief of Staff, Lieutenant George, now Brigadier General George, one of these troops, that I showed up and personally intervened. This is what we call leadership, leading from the front, not on your bum. And that's what I did to inspire and to show that I had skin in the game. I cared about their training, their development, and their welfare. There was no one else to do that. The Ministry of Defense created a position called the Command Officer in Charge, which wasn't a command officer. It wasn't in charge. It was just a position in the Ministry of Defense, and that was General Abdul Rahman and his predecessor, General Youssef, who did a great job advising the Ministry of Defense, but they didn't run the Army. But they allowed the press to think that they ran the Army. The Army, like it or not, was run because it wasn't a real army, technically. It was run by my office and by me and my predecessor until it was operational, then turned over to the government of Liberia. So since there was no one there to do it, I encouraged the general to get out and do this, but I could never get him to do it. It took months before he was comfortable, before he even came out and saw the troops. So in the meantime, there was no one there. I set the example. I showed up almost every day to see these troops, especially in the first 6 months of my time there. It was huge for them. And lots of respect. When I went back to Liberia a couple of years ago in 2018, I think it was, 2017, 2018, I went back there to do some training, and people found out I was on the ground, and the country went crazy. The jungle telegraph spread. Colonel Wyatt's back. Check, check, check. They used to call me Check, and there's a story behind that. This was an advanced individual training, field training exercise at Camp Ware. The training base used to be the Voice of America training site. 4 photographs here to show you the training we were doing. On the left-hand side, you see a sand table that the soldiers developed for mission planning and rehearsals before they went out and did patrolling and combat drills. You see, that's very well done sand table. On the right-hand side, soldiers on a break, eating their meals, enjoying a little break there. And there's a trainer standing over watching them. The bottom left-hand side, you see Liberian troops with the rifle, one of them, or several of them with their rifles, waiting for the next event. On the right-hand side, you see the shelters that we gave them, these little pup tents of the Army camouflage, Army combat uniform pattern, which were lovely. These are nicer than what the U.S. Army had. Brilliant. Well done. Now, this was a huge event that took place in Liberia, a very misleading situation in which the press were informed by people who went to the press and claimed that soldiers were starving, that they were not fed, that they were not taken care of. It was a very complicated situation. It would take me a long time, about an hour, to fully explain it. But the bottom line is this, is that the issue was that the Ministry of Defense was unable to pay soldiers enough money and was putting constraints on them that were causing challenges. I went out to talk to the force of the entire Army. You can see me there on the left-hand side. The troops gathered on the right-hand side and down below around me. Some of the troops had done physical training that morning. Others, so you can see all the unit guidons. We'd activated units, and I'm explaining to soldiers what was going on with the feeding and so that they understood, because they weren't being told. If you look down there at the bottom, you see one of our lieutenants there in her physical training outfit, because she'd been training the troops. She's now a general officer in the Liberian forces. I clearly joined the wrong military. This was in June of 2008. This is another example of 0 day, the first day, or day one actually, June 28th. Another. This is the last cohort that we trained of 525 recruits. Here are some of the images. You see them sitting there, all casual, relaxed. There's ladies in the front there, females, before they rush out. Now they're getting their packets and making sure they're good to go, getting the last testing for HIV testing and things like that. On the right-hand side, they're running out to get into the vans that will take them out to the training location. Then you can see the Barclay Training Center in Monrovia. That's the vans lined up outside. And then at the bottom right-hand side, this is the troops getting their first meal as their recruits, and they're being dressed down by the drill sergeant, including a female drill sergeant there. So there you go. There's some other interesting things that happened here. This was a VIP visit from members of ECOWAS who came to the Officer Candidate School on July 24th. Every day there was something going on: ceremonies, graduations, news reports, conferences, exercises, naval exercises, planning, execution, everything going on every day. I had a tiny, tiny staff, and I carried the load for most of this. My staff did a brilliant job of keeping the rest of the office running very well and helping me out in this when it was possible. But on the left-hand side there, you see a slender, tall-looking Colonel Wyatt. These were the officer candidates who insisted that they have a photograph with me. Everywhere I went, they always wanted a photograph. And there we are. We're all taking a photograph. These are candidates who became officers later on. On the right-hand side, and below that, those are the officer candidates inside the training room as we're executing training as part of that course. On the right-hand side, that's from earlier back in October. That's out at Camp Ware again. This would be the second cohort that I trained. The one on the previous slide was the last cohort. So you can see them lined up out there. Clothing issue on the bottom side there. They're going through the facility where the uniforms and equipment are, and they get issued that when they arrive. And here we come nearly to the end of this, folks. 2 pictures of a professional military that's trained, that is disciplined, that is doing what it's supposed to do. You can see Liberian soldiers on the left-hand side marching out on patrol at the requisite distance, wearing their helmets properly, carrying their rifles safely, pointed towards the ground on safety, and wearing their equipment, dressed properly, and wearing their chin straps, not like some Rambo hero. You can see a leader in the back on the left-hand side, outside the formation, marching alongside to ensure things. On the right-hand side, you see the same thing as they move out to a training area. It's absolutely brilliant to see recruits become soldiers and execute the mission at hand. And there you have it. And this is the end. This is the end. On the upper right-hand side, one of my favorite photos is an iconic image of recruits at the Voice of America site. You can see the buildings up there where we had offices and supplies. And then they always had an ambulance nearby, and medics for all training every time. And even when there wasn't training going on, in the evenings you had them handy. So you can see the ambulance back there. And these are troops marching out in front of the main residential building there. On the top left-hand side was the farewell. That's Dunn, the gentleman who passed away, who is handing me, I gave him a book. That's a book about, that one there, I think it's about Alexander Hamilton. I bought a bunch of books and gave them to my colleagues in the Ministry of Defense and other organizations in Liberia about America. So this is me after being gowned in my gorgeous purple gown, which I still have and wear occasionally here on Chris Wyatt. Yep, that's in Monrovia for a farewell. On the bottom right-hand side, it's Minister Samukai and I at a 4th of July celebration in 2008. Brownie Samukai was frustrating at times, but I always thought he had the best interest of the country at heart, despite accusations to the contrary by many people. I'm wearing my mess blues there with my miniature medals, and I was Lieutenant Colonel at the time, and Brownie Samukai and I. He's got his hand shaking my hand, and then his hand clasped over the top. It's a very good sign of deep affection and respect. This is a great photo. I really like that. And on the bottom, this was my final visit to the training base where I designed and helped build a new Armed Forces Liberia for a new future of safety and security for Liberia. That's the gate to Camp Sandy S. Ware, and with the guard shack, which was not occupied. This is about a mile before you get into the main part. And on my last visit out there in August of 2008, I had my driver take this photograph so I'd have that memory. And there you go, folks. That is my personal perspective of my time in Liberia. There's a lot more to it, but I thought I'd share that with members today. Something different, something interesting that maybe you found appealing. So a small audience, because it's New Year's, because this is interesting, because it's for members only. I don't know which. But for my members only, do you mind if I open it up for the last 15 minutes or so to non-members? Actually, I'm just going to do it without people's permission. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to open this up to anybody who wants to join the chat can do it. I don't think there's many people here. So let me just open up the chat. What's that? Something just happened. Oh, he's got a super chat. Thank you for the super chat there, Brett. Let me get back. I have to do it elsewhere. That's not the right place to change it. I was in the wrong place. Where do I have to do it at? Oh, I know where to do it. So let me go here. Edit. Let me change the chat. Where's it at? I can't find it. What's the deal here? I used to have this figure. I haven't done this in a while, so I guess I've forgotten. I can't figure out how to turn the chat back on. It's been a while, huh? Okay. I thought I just did it right here. Huh. It should have been right here. Customization. Oh, here we go. Anyone can chat. All right, so anybody can chat. Not even subscribers can chat right now. Chat is open for anybody who wants to. How did you remain malaria-free? Oh, good judgment, good hygiene, and prophylaxis. I took hydroxychloroquine. I took mefloquine during my entire time in Liberia. Tough on the liver, but kept me malaria-free. Yep, and also I didn't hang out where mosquitoes were for the most part. And my blood is not something that mosquitoes tend to like. I get bit far less. I can stand in a crowd with a bunch of people. But doesn't mean I won't get bit. But most of those female mosquitoes don't find me attractive. They don't like my blood, and they can smell it. So not many of them bite me unless they're desperate for a meal. If there's other meals nearby, they'll go after those folks. But for the most part, they'll kind of leave me alone. So all of those factors contributed, and I didn't get it. So look at that. Open up the chat, and we already get someone doing something here. So let me get rid of that real quick. I don't know what that's all about. I think that's funny. So already getting trolling going on. I don't know why that happens. But anyway, so yeah, so that's, thank you for the super chat, Brett. So I just never got malaria, thank gosh, you know. In all my years of living in Africa, I've managed to avoid it. So, yep. Brett, when I was in Liberia, no one had electricity. There was no commercial electricity in Liberia. We were in the process of a USAID project to bring limited electrification to Monrovia, to parts of the town. The energy that we had was all done by small generators everywhere we were. You had to have a generator. Generator was a critical piece of equipment in Liberia. And so that was the first thing. Second thing about it was that the embassy, the American embassy, had the most reliable power in the entire country. We had two huge generators, I think 30 kW generators, something like that, that ran the entire embassy compound plus our residences. They might have been 60 kW, they might have been. They were huge generators. And they ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're diesel, and they just ran all the time. They were loud, too. Even though they had baffles around, they were still loud. And they weren't far from my office. My office was on the back road along the water, and if you got out and walked about 100 meters directly south, you'd run right into the generators. But yeah, you got used to the sound after a while. As hard as it sounds, you got used to it. But anyway, so yeah. My blood is very pro-mosquito, says Brett. Yep. You don't want dengue fever either. Oof, that's not good. No, if mosquitoes won't bite you, that's a bonus, folks. Dengue fever, malaria, yellow fever, all these things transmitted by mosquitoes you're not going to get. It's pretty cool. Was yellow fever by mosquitoes? I think it is, yeah. Anyway. Teresa says, well done, Chris. Well, thank you for that. Roy says, that's cool. Beth says, very informative. You look very impressive. Well, thank you, Levin. Yeah. No, that's why when you get these racists to come on my channel, on the old channel, and accuse me of things, or go on Twitter, the Twitter sphere, the same flying monkeys that attack Ronaldo. And they actually, Ronaldo's in his 30s. And while he's done some interesting things, he doesn't have a lifetime of accomplishments to look back on. And not just, I was the employee of the month, but actually, built an army, changed the course of history, saved lives, improved lives. My entire life, I can look back on that, my entire life. So, yeah. So when they attack me, it's just comical, and it's just hilarious. That's why I always tell people when they insult me on social media, I said, perhaps you ought to take a second and do 5 minutes of research about the person you're insulting. My positions, my comments come from an informed position, one of research, one of experience. And not only have I done these things, but I'm an analyst. I'm an intelligence analyst, a person that analyzes things, makes intelligence predictions. And by the way, I've been right almost all the time. Rarely in my career as an intelligence analyst did I make an incorrect prediction. I did it, but rarely. And usually it's because there's just so little information available. You have to make the best estimate you can. Yeah, so that's not a boast. That's a statement of fact. So if you think it's an ego, you're mistaken. If you think I'm boasting, I'm not. There's 34 people watching this program right now. Maybe 10 more will watch it after it's over. So that's hardly an audience that's going to impress the world as far as me boasting. But just a statement of fact. So when they attack me, it's just comical. You know, they don't know what they're talking about. So yesterday, my brother, who's on the opposite side of the political spectrum, he's not a leftist. He's a liberal in the classical liberal sense. After visiting my stepfather in New Jersey, we spoke for a couple hours outside the facility and chatted for a bit and caught up. And invariably, because he likes to talk politics, we got into politics. And arguments that he didn't agree with, we started having them. Now, my brother's a person that'll listen. It doesn't mean he'll change his mind, but he'll listen. And I listen to him as well. But he talked about a few things, and I explained, you know, my positions, like on the jab, my positions on mask, my position, because he asked about them. And he listened to me. He said, he said, I can listen to you because you make sense. You defend your arguments. You're not some crazy nonsense. I said, no. But the problem is these days that people just go into their corners and they build their defenses and they don't want to listen to other people. And that's the crazy thing. Additionally, as I always say, my comments come from an informed position. So remember, folks, I was the one that said coalitions are not the future that South Africa wants. I stand by that. These 6-member G6 Grand Coalition of opposition to the ANC is not sufficient to govern. It's sufficient to get started, but these differences are likely to cause a problem, particularly when this is something that occurs over 22 municipalities in South Africa. So that's just one example. Anyway, you want to win an outright majority, and then if you want to form a coalition, you can do it and let people be part of your team. But if you're beholden to other people, it's difficult. You can't have 6 people in charge. Anyway, let's see what else. Thank you for the super chat, Brett. Do you still stay in touch with those Liberian soldiers? Brett, no, I don't. It's something I, for the most part, didn't do because it seemed inappropriate. It would seem like undue influence. I have come across them. I've come across Prince Johnson, not that Prince Johnson, the guy who castrated Samuel Doe, but I came across another Prince Johnson who was a lieutenant, was now the chief of staff. He's now the commander of the military. I came across him at an event here 2 years ago, just as the pandemic was kicking off and Army Africa was over here hosting the alumni symposium. I was a facilitator and a coordinator and a speaker at that event. They asked me to go to it, and he was there. He and I sat on a panel. We both talked about Liberia, and the admiration was pretty good on his part, and I was impressed that he was doing such a good job. Funny story, though, a couple of these things, a couple of these lieutenants, one who later who's now the Minister of Defense, and the guy who's the commander, both of them, the Ministry of Defense tried to kick them out of the military. Now, we had a no uniform code of military justice because the Liberian government had yet to approve one in legislation. So for the new military, we had to deal with disciplinary issues on an ad hoc basis. And for that, my predecessors created something called the JPB, the Joint Personnel Board. Now, the Joint Personnel Board would be the body that when all the recruiting and vetting, the vetting was done on candidates, it would be sent to this body. They would review it, and they would approve who could go into the military. There's another super chat. Thank you very much, Brett. Those whiny racist ASU students are in trouble, too. Are you talking about the ones who are trying to keep Kyle Rittenhouse out? I'm not sure what you're talking about. Arizona State University, Sun Devils. Anyway, so the Joint Personnel Board would decide who could come in the military. Now, the Joint Personnel Board was a 3-person member panel, so there would never be a tie vote. That was the Minister of Defense himself. It had the actual person, couldn't be a replacement. Minister of Defense, the Dean of the law school, Dean Jala, who was a lawyer, a legal authority, and then the chief of the Office of Security Cooperation, because we're the ones paying for everything from the American Embassy. So 3 people in this panel, the JPB. So we had to meet periodically. Whenever we had a new class coming, we'd get a whole list of all the names, and it had their ethnicity, their age, their gender, where they're from, all that stuff. And we had to review it and then approve. It was pretty much a de facto thing because the process was so thorough that we didn't run any trouble. Now, if anybody have been discovered to have done something wrong or committed an offense before they came in, and we found out after the fact, there would be a special meeting of the JPB. We would meet and we'd discuss, look at the case, we review it, and make a decision. Hardly a judicial process, but it was fair process. Now, when I arrived, they called for a JPB meeting because Prince Johnson had left Liberia and gone to Sweden to marry the aid worker he'd been hooking up with and knocking boots with, and he married her. And he was gone for 2 weeks. He came back, and they wanted to arrest him and kick him out of the military for going AWOL. Well, my first inclination was, yeah, we can't afford this. We can't have officers. We have 9 officers, and one of them just decides to run off to Sweden and get married. That's not acceptable. That's a violation of everything. They can't have a banana republic here. That was my initial response. Now, that was no decision made. That the case was presented to me, and that was my first reaction to it. Then we had the hearing, and we listened to the evidence. And I found out that Prince Johnson had requested leave on half a dozen occasions from the Ministry of Defense. They had never responded to any of his requests. They had his request. We had evidence they had it. And they had no policy and procedure in place on how to handle something like this, to give him leave. There was no leave policy. They left him in an untenable position. So I felt he should be sanctioned and punished, and he was, but he shouldn't be kicked out. And that the Ministry of Defense was falling down. It needed to get together. And so they did. They got together. They got their plan. They created a leave procedure. But the Ministry of Defense wanted to kick him out. So when we voted to remove him from the military, the guy who is now the commander of the Armed Forces of Liberia came within 1 vote of being removed from the Armed Forces of Liberia in June of 2007. And the vote that kept him in the Armed Forces of Liberia was my vote. So if he screws up, blame me. If he's a genius, blame me. No, seriously. So we voted 2-1. The minister voted to kick him out. Dean Jalla and I both voted to keep him in. Initially, Dean Jalla wanted to keep him in, and I was inclined to kick him out. But I said, let's look at more evidence. We reconvened, and we voted. And then they also wanted to kick out Ziakon, who's the defense minister, claiming he abused civilians outside the gate in an incident that was falsely reported, over emotionally reacted upon by the Ministry of Defense. I investigated, took a look at it, spoke to all parties involved, and found out what had actually happened. And I calmed them down. And we kept Ziakon in the force because he was arguably the best officer we had, and later became the chief of staff, and then eventually became the Minister of Defense. Yep, so there you go. Tried to assault and kick out white conservatives with Blue Lives Matter sticker on their computers. Oh, that's from like 2 months ago. Okay, I didn't realize that was at ASU. Okay, so are they in trouble? What did they do? I didn't see that story, Brett. Hey, there's Tom. Tom, there you go. Cool, man. It's been ages, man. Good that you showed up for this one. Dying Corps, Security Sector Reform. Yep. Deputy Chief of Training, BTC Facility Manager, Campware, Chief of Training, AFC Mentor, and Campware Facility Manager. Yeah, and if it wasn't for the folks in Dying Corps particularly, but also in PA, but especially in Dying Corps, none of this would have been possible. None of this would have been possible. But everything I told you is true. And it's not fuzzy recollection or fuzzy memory. Tom was there. Tom can share these stories with you and many more. Good to see you, Tom. Well, you used to be with me every day, man. Just come back and see us. Robot Trucker says, very cool story. Yeah, I don't really stay in touch with him anymore because it's maybe now. Over a decade removed, 13 years since I left there. Now it's probably okay. But yeah. Are you combat medic certified? I am not. No, be a combat medic, you have to go through training and have a specialty for it. You have combat lifesaver, and I've had combat lifesaver training, which is different. That's like a first responder thing. We have lots of those. Tom can tell you about the combat lifesaver. We all agree that crazy Delta Karen is going to jail. She assaulted that old man and spit him when she was doing. Yeah, exactly. No, she wasn't doing the same thing he was. No, Brett. He was eating. Delta allows you to take your mask off to eat. They served him a meal. He was eating. He wasn't doing anything except following the rules. She's wandering along without her mask on and sees him eating and takes offense. I don't know if he ate later or he got his meal after everybody else or he fell asleep and woke up and his food was there and he was the only one eating. But she decided to be an ass and go off on him. They weren't doing the same thing. What you're trying to say and what you mean, Brett, is that they both didn't have a mask on. Yes, but she was walking around without a mask, which is incorrect. He was eating, which is correct, without a mask on. Now, Delta encourages you, doesn't require, encourages you to put your mask on between chews, but that's moronic. So he was eating. She's just I hope she goes to jail. She deserves, but she won't. She's a leftist. They'll excuse that behavior. Assaulting an 80-year-old man. Spitting, punching, scratching. Sick, twisted person. Self-absorbed people. So here we go again. All right, sorry, folks. I don't know why this is going on here. Anyway, so yeah, the mods are missing and I caught it. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up this stream, and I hope that people found it interesting. Feel free to leave a comment behind. I do appreciate it. Yes, we do have trolls, Teresa, and I've been dealing with them on my own, lonesome. That's 2 I've already dealt with that have popped in. I don't know why. Don't know why they're showing up. But they've been trying to be innocuous so far. I think they're automated trolls. I don't think they're actually people there. So anyway, don't sweat it, folks. If they want to burn hours by watching my program, as long as they don't do anything inappropriate, we got it under control. We'll have the news at the top of the hour about 17 minutes from now here on Chris Wyatt Africa on New Year's Eve, Sylvester Aubin 2021. Thank you very much for tuning in. Be sure to smash the like button, folks, and give us a like on this stream. We'll really appreciate it. And leave any comments behind that you have. Thanks, Brett, for the 2 super chats. We got 45 likes. Can we get 50 out of that? Are there at least 5 people left that haven't liked it yet? And you're all welcome. This will be part of what I do for members perks, but I'll be doing more of these history and events like this, ones that I was personally involved in, plus other events. I still want to do a stream about Lieutenant Colonel Paul Letto von Vorbeck, the commander of the Deutsche Ostafrika Askari, the East German forces, the Schutztruppe in World War I. I'll probably do a stream on that sometime soon. Maybe do one on a few other interesting things that are going on and historically. But anyway, those things will be coming up. We'll make them members perks. Anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in. If you were not a paying member and you were waiting to chat, thank you for your patience. To the trolls, find something else to do with your life. I'm going to drop off now in about 16 minutes. I'll be back with the news, folks. Lots of news. Beckett Sealy, South Africa's clueless Minister of Police, threatens South Africans, seeks to intimidate and frighten you and cow you into behavior. But funny thing, on the way to the forum, nobody informed Beckett Sealy that the curfew was over. You can find that video on my channel, and I'll be talking about that. Also, once again, folks, our thoughts and prayers to Ronelle Kantz and her family, whose daughter tragically died in a traffic accident last night. She was 27 years old. Her daughter, Letitia, 27 years of age. Ronelle Kantz, a dedicated and loyal supporter and viewer of this channel, lost her daughter last night in a traffic accident. It reminds us once again, it brings home the fragility of life. I went to see my ailing stepfather, who's 75, and not very good health, at a care facility yesterday for a 3-hour drive up there, and then came back in a 3-hour drive in poor weather, not rushing, being very careful to drive. And I got that message while I was en route. When I pulled over for a stop and stretched my legs, I saw that message from Ronelle. So thoughts and prayers to Ronelle and her family as they deal with this obviously very difficult and painful time. And of course, it comes during the holidays, which is doubly painful. And this just a reminder, folks, South Africans, the shackles have been taken off. Please react responsibly tonight. Don't go out and get liquored up and beat your spouses, your dogs, your cats, your children. Don't drink and drive tonight. Otherwise, we'll see hospitals full of people from the festivities. Enjoy it. And by the way, one final remark about that before I lock up this stream. For those of you inclined to thank the South African government for restoring your freedoms, no. They stole your freedom. They stole your freedom. They didn't do anything for you. They simply curtailed their fascism. Don't thank them. Excoriate them for taking it in the first place. Their lockdowns accomplished nothing, and they're shutting it down at a time of outrageously high number of infections. So it just proves it was all fraud. Thanks a lot, folks. Thanks a lot. We'll catch you here in the next hour, in the next 15 minutes for Indaba Afternoons today. And there's a nice super chat just came in. We got 48 likes now. Thank you so much for that. And that one comes in from Nick Muller, 140 Rand. Thank you for that, Nick. Appreciate the stripper chat. Woo-hoo. And I'll catch you all here shortly. I've got to write down my headlines for the news, so I got to get off. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this special feature that was about my personal experiences with the Armed Forces Library. I would spend days telling it, but this was a condensed version. I hope you enjoyed it and the imagery from those events. Take care of yourselves, folks. See you here shortly on Chris Wyatt Africa in 14 minutes. Time to go. Take care of yourselves. And Happy New Year to everyone. Guten Rutsch.